Today it's all about leachies. We're gonna talk about a little bit about their care and how to breed them.
The tips and tips and tips and tips. We're gonna show some of the tips and tricks we do to breed them.
So this monster gecko here is actually called a giant gecko, and they are the world's largest species of geckos. And another nickname for them, well, their scientific name is Rhacodactylus leachianis. Most people know them by the nickname Leachie, and they're just like a big bulldog, big wrinkly bulldog of the gecko world. They're the largest geckos in existence right now, and they're just such an amazing animal to keep and to breed and to just interact with when you have it as a pet.
So these giant geckos come from New Caledonia, like the crested geckos. One of the big differences is that these guys, they're giant, first of all. Second of all, these guys come from the mainland of New Caledonia and its insular islands. And actually each island kind of has its own like size, leachies, even different colored and patterns. The Grand Terre, which is the mainland, have the largest of the leachianis, and they're usually the less colorful, while those insular islands like Nuana have the smaller leachianis, but yet they happen to be the most colorful.
Now, caring for a leachie or a giant gecko is pretty much the same as caring for a...
Told you.
They're pretty much like crested geckos. They will jump. They are arboreal. They actually tend to hang out in the upper parts of the trees, inside the tree hollows, and that's where they actually live in the wild.
Different islands and Grand Terre have different color, pattern, and even sizes. The Grand Terres being the largest of the leachianis. That's where you get like the 450 plus gram giant leachies, while the insular islands like Nuana, they're gonna have the smaller leachie locales, but they're gonna be a lot more colorful, a lot being pink blotches, white blotches, even some purpley colorations.
Yeah, so when it comes to care, the giant geckos are pretty simple to care for. They're not a hard lizard to keep. They're very hardy, and they the only thing is they're a little expensive, so it's not going to be common for the public. It's always going to be a harder animal to find than, let's say, a crested gecko or even a gargoyle gecko. But the cool thing about these animals is, like I said, if you do have the money to, if you can afford one, they're just as easy to keep as a crested gecko. Basically, you're gonna keep same type of temperatures, maybe a little bit of a warmer spot, like around 80 degrees, 85 degrees for an adult, and the ambient temperature of about like 75-ish to 78 degrees is perfect. You can provide UVB, but it's not necessary. We have kept leachies without UVB for a long time, and a lot of the other breeders who actually specialize in these animals have kept them without UVB as well. So you don't need the UVB. As babies, I wouldn't recommend giving them a warm spot, like I said earlier, of 85 degrees. I would recommend keeping them just room temperature, because babies do tend to dehydrate quicker. So the babies just keep at room temperature. Once they get to an adult size, you can even give them like a little hot spot or under tank heater that you can put on the side of the tank, because they do tend to stick to the glass like this and just hang out on the tank a lot. Now, they're gonna eat the crested gecko diet. They will also eat a bunch of insects. They'll even eat small mice. They'll eat pinkies, roaches, all that good stuff. They'll even eat feeder geckos. But the main diet is gonna be the crested gecko diet. Now, we do provide these guys a water bowl, because when they get to this size, they are big drinkers. I will often catch them at night just drinking out of their water bowl, especially if the humidity in the enclosure is not that high. The humidity, you want to keep it at around 70%, 70 to 80% for the most part. But, it's not like a specific science. It has to be like that all the time. Don't freak out. There should be some dry periods during the day. That's about it when it comes to humidity and temperature.
Now, the way we like to house these guys, we like to we like to mimic how they're found in nature. So a lot of times they're going to be found in tree hollows, which is why all of our leachie cages do have an abundance of cork bark. Kind of mimics the tree hollows. And then you're going to want the rainforest setup kind of like a crested gecko with the fake branches, leaves, you know, substrate. You can do from paper towel to cypress mulch to soil, something higher humidity, something's going to retain the humidity. And then like David mentioned, a large water bowl, because especially as adults, these guys are big drinkers. So the most important thing for me is being the cork bark or some kind of hollow where these guys can go in. Unlike the crested geckos, these guys are actually pretty hard to breed. Reason being is in the wild they do pair bond, and if they don't get along, they could rip each other into pieces. Like, no joke, they can kill each other. That's why when pairing these guys, you do got to be careful. You do got to keep an eye on them, because like in less than 24 hours, if they're not compatible, they can kill each other.
Yeah, so that's a big thing with the leachianas, and that's one of the reasons why the prices are, you know, pretty expensive, because these animals, they're not easy to breed. They're not like a crested gecko where you throw a male and a female together and then you'll have 12 to 18 eggs in a year. These guys are going to produce a lot less geckos, and they're going to be a lot harder to breed. These guys are not, you know, sexually mature up until 2.5 to 3 years old, so it's gonna be a little bit of a longer wait, and then even then you're not guaranteed to, you know, that your pair will like each other. So you're gonna have to do a couple tricks that we're gonna talk about in order to get them to like each other, in order to get them to be compatible with each other. And if you're lucky, their fertility rate will be good, and the female will lay, you know, up to 6 eggs a year. Some females will lay a couple more, but that's about the average. Alright, so when it comes down to breeding giant geckos, one of the most important parts is how you pair them up. A couple weeks or even like a month or two before you pair them up, you want to make sure you get them familiar with each other's scents. Some of the tricks that we used here to breed our leachies is switch the cork bark from the male's enclosure to the females, and the females to the male's enclosure. That's going to get them, you know, used to the scent of the other gecko. It's going to familiarize them with it, and they're going to become a little bit less territorial when it's time for pairing them up. Another trick that you could do is having one leachie in a smaller enclosure and putting that small enclosure in the bigger enclosure with the other leachie. That way they can kind of see each other and interact through the fence. We have done that in the past, but what we do the most is switching the cork bark, switching the leachie from one enclosure to the other. So I'll put the male in the female's enclosure, and I'll put the female in the male's enclosure. That's usually what works best. Now, after you do that, like a month prior to introducing them, what I do also is I like to introduce them during the cooler periods. Now, you want to make sure that the leachies are fed the day before and the night of introduction. Now, when I pair them up, usually here in Florida, it starts to get cooler in the couple last weeks of December and January, even February sometimes. That's going to depend on the area that you live in. You want to introduce them when the daytime temperatures are maybe around like 73, 75, and the nighttime temperature is 65, 68 degrees. That's gonna make the leachies less aggressive towards each other. Any animal really, like even if you're pairing up gargoyle geckos or crested geckos or anything, it's gonna, you know, it's gonna allow the animals to just kind of interact with each other without necessarily being super active and super territorial. And you know, when they get hotter, they do get a little bit more, you know, basically worked up. So once you introduce your leachies, it is very important that you keep a close eye on them, because the first couple hours, the first couple days, you know, they can really tear each other up. So you want to make sure that the leachies aren't going to be, you know, killing each other basically. They're not going to be tearing each other up too bad. Leachie breeding is a little rough, a lot rougher than crested geckos or some of the other species you might be used to. So you want to make sure that you look out for the right signs and you look out for the wrong signs. Some of the signs that they might be getting along is, believe it or not, when they lock jaw. That means when they bite each other's jaws, and they're just basically testing each other's vigor. They're trying to see if the female's basically trying to see if the male is tough enough to breed with her. Now, if you see bite marks on the head, that's pretty normal. If the animals are nipping at each other, it's okay, as long as they're not really tearing the flesh and opening wounds and drawing blood. I wouldn't separate them. I'd kind of just let them be, but keep a close eye on them. If they bite each other's tail off, that is kind of normal with Leachie breeding as well. So that doesn't necessarily mean separate them. You just got to keep, a closer eye on them, because obviously they like it a little rougher. They're going to be a little more violent with each other. Now, some of the good signs to look out for if they did pair bond is if both Leachies are sleeping together during the day, if they tend to be, on the glass screen sleeping with each other, if they're touching, if, they're in the cork bark together, that's also a good sign. If sometimes you might have a pair that's compatible, but that doesn't breed. Monster and Miss Thickums here, their first year, I saw them copulate, but they didn't produce any fertile eggs, and they were together the whole year because I said, they're getting along, I might as well leave them together. And on the second year, they started producing fertile eggs. So sometimes you got to give them some time. This is not an animal that you just, pair up and breed. You're going to have a lot of patience, and it's definitely worth it to hatch out one of these big monster geckos, especially when they're so tiny and cute, and you grow them out and it turns into this thing. Now, some of the signs that the Leachies are not getting along, like I said earlier, some, big scars on the body or on the legs, if there's missing toes, if there's like skin being torn up, then the bites are a little bit more malicious and not for breeding purposes. If you see a Leachie is getting a lot thinner, losing weight, hanging out on the bottom of the enclosure, and one Leachie is on top, that usually means the one on the bottom is not as dominant, is being intimidated, is being bullied. So you want to make sure that you separate that Leachie. Now, if they do hang out together, you want to make sure you leave them alone. Try to not bother them too much. I try to just leave the Leachies. I rarely like to handle my breeding animals. Just make sure they have enough food and water, and then that's gonna reduce any type of fighting or competition to a minimum.
So one other thing you want to look out for before pairing your Leachies is you want to make sure the male is about the same size, if not bigger than the female. Why? We've noticed that when the female is bigger, she bullies the male a lot more, and it turns out to be a lot less successful pairing. The females are going to be more territorial, they're going to bully more. Also, the smaller male is going to be a little more intimidated. So that's why we always want the male to be either the same size or just a bit bigger than the female. Now, the way we set up these enclosures, we like to, like I was mentioning before for breeding, we want to have cork barks in there, multiple cork barks. Though it is good that they sleep in that one cork bark, we do still want to have multiple. Also, if you do like a paper towel substrate, newspaper, or cypress mulch, something they can't really dig and bury their eggs in, you're gonna want a lay spot. The way we like to do it like that is because we know they're gonna lay in the lay box. If we did all of it eco earth soil, they could lay anywhere and everywhere, and we wouldn't know when they lay. We wouldn't, it'd be a lot harder to find too. So we like to do like a potted plant lay box with a bunch of moist soil, so when they do lay their eggs, it should be fine in there for a few weeks until we find it. Also, for all these island mixes, 18 by 18 by 24 Exoterra should be fine for a pair. And for some of the Grand Terre mixes, 24 by 24 by 24 should be perfectly fine as well. Also, you could always go bigger. There's nothing wrong with going bigger. And like I said, the cork bark, some kind of substrate. Like I said, we like to use cypress mulch, holds in humidity, and they can't really lay their eggs in there. So they're forced to go to the lay box in here, and that's when we dig them up, incubate them at room temp, just like the crested geckos, and then around 120 days later, you're gonna have some baby monster Leachies.
So, assuming that your Leachies, get along, they breed, and you guys get fertile eggs, the females are going to lay eggs every about 45 days to, 45 to even 60 days sometimes. Now, when your female lays eggs, you're going to want to take the eggs out of the enclosure as soon as possible, just so sometimes, they could lay them in the wrong spot, like they typically won't lay them in the substrate like the mulch or paper towels or newspaper. But sometimes leachies, especially if it's their first year, they don't know what they're doing, so they will just lay them anywhere. So in case that happens, you want to make sure that you get them like from the enclosure to the incubator as soon as possible. Now when we say incubator, it really just means a Tupperware with Rapashi Super Hatch. We incubate the eggs at around room temperature, so that for us is around 76 to 78 degrees. Typically the eggs will hatch, they can hatch out as early as like 70 days and as late as 160 days depending on the temperatures. So cooler temperatures will hatch the eggs a lot longer. It's going to take a lot longer for the eggs to hatch, and warmer temperatures are going to make the eggs hatch a lot sooner. Now if you incubate them at cooler temperatures, the babies are going to take a little bit longer to hatch, but they're going to be a little bit bigger. If you incubate them, you know, at warmer temperatures, the babies are going to be a little bit smaller when they hatch. Now, typically, warmer temperatures will tend to hatch out mostly males, and cooler temperatures will tend to hatch out mostly females. So if you're looking to produce more females or males, you got to incubate accordingly. Now, for some reason, GT Leachianis are a lot more territorial and they're a lot harder to breed. They're a lot harder to pair up with each other than like the GT mixes or basically the insular island localities, the Nuana, Nuami, Pine Island even. So depending on the type of leachie you have, you might have better luck with breeding. If you have a pair of Nuanas, it's probably going to be a lot easier to breed than a pair of pure GT Yates, just because they're smaller, they're not going to do as much damage to each other, and they don't tend to be as territorial. Now, something that is very important when you're breeding leachies is to keep track and records of the egg production and of the females. You want to make sure that the pair is compatible and that they're going to be producing fertile eggs continuously, and you want to also make sure that the female is going to be, you know, producing. Sometimes a male and a female might produce bad eggs, and then you put that same female to another male and they'll produce perfect eggs. So you want to make sure that the pair is compatible. You want to make sure that you're keeping track of when the female is laying, so you know, okay, if she laid today, I don't have to check for another 2-3 weeks. Depending on the female, maybe even 4 weeks. The GT Leachianas tend to lay a little bit less often than the island locales, so that's something to keep in mind. If you're keeping track, if you're keeping record of your egg production, it's going to be a lot easier for you to manage the colony, especially if you're starting to have a lot of different animals. So something to keep in mind. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed this video. This is pretty much everything you need to know about leachies. Obviously you still need to do a little bit more research, but I think we covered everything.
Yeah, hopefully this video helps you guys produce some beautiful monsters. And if you like this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter. We have all those social media platforms and post individual content on every single one of them. So make sure you guys check it out.
Another thing for us, South Floridians, we are having an event down in Miami, the Wynwood area, with Blake from Blake's Exotic Animal Ranch. We're gonna go take a bunch of cool animals. We're gonna go hang out. There's gonna be music, food, and you know, it's gonna be a good time. Go check it out. It's July 6th. Go to our Instagram page for more information. It's gonna be so awesome. We're gonna take pretty much chameleons, bearded dragons, blue-tongue skinks, all that good stuff. Blake is going to take some tortoises. There's going to be alligators, Burmese pythons. So come check it out if you're local. We would love to meet you guys there. And one more thing.
And the sale. Ooh,
oh yeah.
Summer sale.
Today is the day. There is a summer sale going on. It's a BOGO, so buy one, get one on crested geckos over $150. Our biggest sales are always our summer sales, so go to the website, check it out if you're looking for a gecko or two, and you know, check it out. Patreon, USARK, you've heard it a million times. See you guys next week.